Welcome back. In the last lesson, we talked about the power of natural consequences. If you must use a consequence, natural consequences are preferred for several reasons. For one, there's no adult interaction. Because the consequence happens naturally, the child can only be angry with himself for the choice. Also, the monkey is off your back and life becomes the big teacher. Natural consequences really do provide the best training for future behaviors. In this lesson, we'll talk about logical consequences. Logical consequences can be used when a natural consequence isn't safe or practical or just doesn't make sense. Logical consequences are different in that they're engineered by the adult. They don't just happen naturally, we have to create them. Logical consequences involve either delaying or denying a privilege or making amends. So, for example, with the bike helmet situation we discussed in the last lesson, we wouldn't allow the natural consequence of not wearing a bike helmet to play out. So instead, we have to engineer a consequence. If the child doesn't wear the bike helmet, he loses the privilege of riding the bike for the day or for the week. Or if the child breaks a friend's toy, the logical consequence is he makes amends. Either he helps fix it, or perhaps he uses his allowance to replace or repair it. Logical consequences don't happen naturally. There's always some parental involvement. As with many of the tools we've talked about, there are guidelines that will help make them more effective. For consequences to be fair and effective, we use the 5 R's of consequences formula. This will make sure the outcome is empowering for both the parent and the child. The 5 R's formula is adapted from Jane Nelson's Positive Discipline and from H. Stephen Glenn. So let's go through the 5 R's now. The first of the 5 R's is respectful. A logical consequence shouldn't cause suffering or shame. It shouldn't cause physical harm or humiliation. And it shouldn't involve withholding love or affection. To be respectful, consequences should be talked about in a calm and respectful voice. Kids will be more open to learning from consequences if we treat them respectfully, because they don't have to feel defensive. The second R is the consequence must be related to the misbehavior. And this is the one that parents almost always miss. Because here's the thing, kids think more logically than you might guess. So if the kid won't turn off the computer when they're supposed to, and you impose a consequence of not going to the sleepover that night, that would be completely unrelated and wouldn't make sense. Not only is the learning event less likely to happen, but it's going to feel unfair. Here's a really important point to remember. Your kids don't have to like the consequence. They probably won't, but it must feel fair. If it feels arbitrary or willy-nilly, I promise the anger will turn on you and your child can feel perfectly justified in his behavior. Consequences must be related to the misbehavior. Now, if you're panicking because you can't think of a related consequence for a particular behavior, please don't stress about that. It probably means that there's another toolbox solution that is more appropriate in that situation. If consequences are the most appropriate tool, the related consequence will be pretty obvious. The third R is that the consequence must be reasonable in duration and severity. So depending on the child's age, the duration of the consequence could be 1 day, or for older kids, it can be for a week. We don't want to make the consequence so unreasonable that the kid thinks there's no hope they'll ever get their privilege back, or get so discouraged that he won't even try in the future. Just keep it reasonable. The fourth R is the consequence must be revealed in advance. We talked about the importance of revealing in advance during natural consequences. The child must know what you expect or the family rule, and he has to know the consequence if he chooses to not follow the rule. That way, he'll be fully informed, and then he has the power to make a choice. If he follows the rule, then great. If not, he made the choice and can only be mad at himself when he experiences the consequence. Just like with natural consequences, if we don't reveal in advance and the consequence comes out of the blue, you can bet it's going to feel like blame, shame, and pain punishment. And your child will be more inclined to turn his anger on you. We want to close the loop with the fifth R, which is having the child repeat back. So just to make sure we're on the same page, what is our rule for picking up the toys and what will happen if the toys aren't picked up from the living room before bedtime. This repeat back process will help your child remember the rule, but it also helps you feel better about following through since you know she understood the consequence. Let's look at a couple of examples of logical consequences. When you throw sand in the sandbox, the logical consequence is you lose the privilege of playing in the sandbox for the day. When a teenager leaves the gas tank on empty, the logical consequence is he doesn't get to use the family car the next weekend. The consequences make sense because they're related to the misbehavior. And then when we reveal them in advance, the child knows full well what the consequence is if they make a poor choice, and they can only be angry with themselves. Let's use technology as an example because that's a big power struggle for a lot of families. Your reveal in advance and repeat back script could sound something like this. You know, I've noticed we've been having some issues with technology lately. Sometimes when I ask you to turn off the media, either you ignore my request or there's a lot of grumbling and complaining. And that's not okay because, of course, having technology is a privilege and there are responsibilities that go along with that. Now, our new rule for technology is 30 minutes a day. So when it's time to turn off your game or turn off the device, I expect that you'll turn it off without any fussing or complaining or begging for 5 more minutes. Now, I'll give you a 5-minute warning so you can save your game, but it's up to you to turn off the device. And you may want to set a timer so you know how long 5 minutes is. Now, I'm sure we're not going to have any issues with this, but if you choose to not follow our rule for technology, or if there's any fussing or complaining or begging for more time, you're going to lose your technology privileges for the next week. And just so we're on the same page, can you repeat back to me our rule for technology and what the consequence would be if you choose not to follow that rule? Once the child repeats back, you know everyone is on the same page and you have a verbal agreement. Also, if you have a frequent forgetter, you may want to ask the question, now, since I won't be reminding you about this new rule, what can you do to help you remember it? Maybe he needs to make a sign or a note, either in pictures or words, depending on his age, that he hangs on the TV or he tapes to the device, but it's his job to remember, not yours. Your job is to get out of the reminding and repeating game, so let him be responsible. Remember, if he's old enough to enjoy the privilege of technology, and by the way, technology is a privilege, not a right, he's definitely old enough to follow your family rules. So you've revealed in advance and he repeated back. Now it's his choice. If he follows your rules for technology and turns off the device when it's time, then everyone's good and he gets to continue enjoying his technology. If not, then he's made the choice. It's not something you did to him, he made the choice. Now, if you do have to follow through and implement the consequence, you can do it respectfully but confidently because you laid the groundwork with the 5 R's. When you're following through, you can say something like, "Gosh, I see you chose to lose your video privileges. I see you chose to lose your video privileges, but you know what, buddy? This is a learning opportunity, and I know you'll make a better choice next time." That second half of the statement is essential. This is a learning opportunity, and I know you'll make a better choice next time. I know you'll be able to follow the family rules for technology. Even though he may be upset in the moment, it allows the child to save face, and it expresses your confidence in him. He made a mistake, but you know he can be more successful next time. That's much more encouraging. Now, here's a wrinkle about revealing in advance. What happens when you don't expect a behavior to happen, so you didn't reveal it in advance? Well, the first thought is there may be another tool that would be more helpful to solve the problem. Always go there first. If you absolutely feel a consequence is necessary, but you haven't revealed one in advance, an either or consequence in the moment will do the trick. So in a very calm and pleasant voice, you can say, either you can stop throwing sand or you'll need to leave the sandbox. Either you can play in the house without roughhousing, or you can go outside where you can roll around and make a lot of noise. Either way, I'm fine. Either you can sign off the game now, or it won't be available for the rest of the day. Either or is an in-the-moment tool when you need a behavior to stop, but we're still offering a respectful choice so the child can respond with dignity. For For the either or choice to be effective, you have to deliver it in your calm voice, right? If you get rattled or yell about it, it completely loses its effectiveness. And that attitude of indifference is key. Either way, I'm fine. You make the choice. Of course, the either or has to be reasonable. It has to be related to the misbehavior, and you have to follow through. So if you offer the choice, either you can sit at the table in your chair, or I'll assume you're done with dinner and remove your plate. Well, if the child makes the choice to jump down from the chair again, then you're going to have to follow through on that and remove the plate. And then the child can have the opportunity to try again at the next normally scheduled snack or meal. We want to be sure that we follow through on our either or, otherwise it's just an idle threat and your kids will not take you seriously. And keep in mind, once you follow through once or twice, you probably won't have to deal with those same issues again. And the siblings that are in the room, they'll get the same message as well. A lot of parents will ask, how do I know whether I should use a natural or a logical consequence? And that's a great question. When you're not sure which type of consequence to use, ask yourself this question first. Is the consequence really necessary? Consequences are a great tool, but they should really be a last resort. Are there other ways we could solve this problem instead? Maybe retool your when-then routine, control the environment, take time for training, get more consistent with mind, body, and soul time, offer more positive choices. Can we bring the child into the process to figure out how to solve the problem? Almost always, there's a more empowering tool you can use before you get to consequences. But let's get back to the original question. If a consequence truly is necessary, how do you know whether to use a natural consequence or a logical consequence? Which type of consequence to use depends on who owns the problem, who will be inconvenienced or bothered by this situation. In the situation we talked about earlier with the child who constantly forgets to take his coat to school, who was inconvenienced or bothered by that? It was the child, right? The child is the one who's going to be cold or uncomfortable or might have to miss recess. When it's the child's problem, a natural consequence is most appropriate. In the situation of a kid not cleaning his room or not making his bed, who owns that problem? Well, the adult owns that problem, right? Because let's be honest, most kids really don't care if their room is clean or their bed is made. An orderly room is important to us. We own that problem. And since we own the problem, we would use a logical consequence or some other tool. In the case of making the bed or cleaning the room, a when-then would actually be your first strategy. When the bed is made and the room is clean, then you can enjoy your 30 minutes of media time. Or when the bed is made and your room is clean, then you can go outside and play with your friends. If she still doesn't clean the room with a when-then routine, you can engineer a logical consequence. But again, we want this to be the last resort. The logical consequence might be, sweetie, our rule is that your room has to be tidied up by 5 p.m. each day. And by tidied, I mean stuff is cleared off the floor and off your bed and dresser. If you choose to not clean up your room, that's fine. I'll take care of it, but anything laying around will go into a box and be unavailable for the next week. So if the problem is more related to the parent, then a logical consequence is appropriate. Let's talk about the follow-through. Unlike natural consequences, logical consequences don't just happen on their own. You have to follow through. However, when you follow through with a logical consequence, it's super important to stay calm and respectful. Otherwise, it's going to feel like punishment, and it's going to end up in a power struggle. We also want to avoid the I told you so attitude we talked about earlier. You knew the deal. You knew that if you didn't respect our technology rules, you were going to lose your privileges. So don't get mad at me, young man. You made this choice. Can you hear the I told you so attitude? Again, that's called piggybacking. It's piling on the blame, shame, and pain, and in doing so, it ruins a perfectly good consequence. Not only does it turn the anger on you, but the child will not be taking personal responsibility. All of his energy will be focused on how mean you are for doing this to him. Instead, offer empathy, because he'll probably be upset. I know this is hard, buddy. But you know what? This is a learning opportunity, and I know you'll make a better choice next time. That allows him to save face. He's still not happy that he lost his technology privileges, but he doesn't have to feel like the worst kid on the planet either. And then encourage him to think of ways he might make a better choice next time. What can he do to help him remember your rules for technology? That turns it into a learning experience. Now, I know you probably have a lot of questions about consequences. You'll find answers in the FAQs for this session, as well as in your workbook. However, there's one common question I want to address here, and that is, what if I can't think of a good consequence? If you're asking that question, celebrate. That means you've thoughtfully considered the process for implementing consequences, and you're aware of meeting the 5 R's. If you can't think of a good consequence, a natural or logical consequence that meets the 5 R's, it's respectful, related to the misbehavior, and that's the hardest one, reasonable in duration, is revealed in advance, and can be repeated back to you, then that means that consequences are not the right tool. Another tool in the Positive Parenting Solutions toolbox will actually be more helpful in solving the problem. For parents who haven't been through the extensive training you're working on, they think consequences are the silver bullet for everything. But that's not the case at all. In fact, we should rarely use consequences. There's almost always a tool other than consequences that would be more effective in solving the problem and would be more solution-focused and empowering for the child. Remember, our #1 goal is helping the child learn. You may end up using consequences down the road, but they definitely shouldn't be your go-to tool. In the next lesson, we'll take a look at one of the most popular parenting tactics that people think is an appropriate consequence, but really isn't when we look at it more closely. I'll see you in the next lesson.